Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Voice for Freedom podcast. I'm Simeon Myers, the CEO of Arise, here with the beautiful Simone, happens to be my wife. And we are very honored to have Lucas Cole today,
The
who's one of the
beautiful Lucas
founding,
Cole.
he's beautiful as well, one of the founders, one of the founding members, alongside my brother Colev and I, of Arise. And Lucas, I could say, has been with us from the beginning of Arise and is a true friend and trusted partner to my brother and I. So, Lucas, welcome.
Hey, glad to be here.
It's good to have you today. And it's an interesting topic we will be discussing today. I specifically wanted Lucas because Lucas is a Gentile Christian who is a Zionist and supports Israel, but also just is deeply engaged in the dialogue that's taking place right now, particularly in the United States, with regard to the Christian perspective on Israel. And we know it's growing more and more controversial day to day.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
before we jump into the weeds, Lucas, maybe just give us a little bit of your background. You can, whatever you feel is pertinent to the conversation, maybe just sort of what vein of Christianity you're in. And then we can talk about, how Israel even showed up on your radar.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think it's important, you're right from the get-go, to kind of to state that I became a Christian first and a Zionist second, right? Israel was completely off my radar even before Christianity was off my radar. I mean, I came to believe and kind of start following Jesus when I was 25, and that was kind of all new to me. Even though I grew up in the church, I grew up in the Lutheran church, I was very much kind of a cultural Christian, all that kind of stuff. It wasn't until I was 25 that I actually really considered the gospel and really considered oh, I think this is true, and I'm gonna follow after it with all my life. So I'm 25 years old, come to faith, kind of have like a radical transformation in my life. Moved away from Michigan down to Cincinnati, Ohio. Found a community here, really good people. Starting to read the Bible, starting to pray, starting to do all that kind of stuff, all the kind of the normal Christian stuff, and joined a company, a video production company, with friends of mine who were all believers, and one of them was a mentor of mine and whatnot. And I'm probably 3 years into my faith at this time, and we get approached by your brother, Kalev, to do a video that was essentially explaining the United Nations bias against Israel. He was kind of staging a protest against, I think it was a United Nations conference that was being held in New York, where Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was going to be a keynote speaker at this UN Human Rights Council, which is just ridiculous for anybody who knows who that is. And he was staging this protest, and so he wanted to make this video through his organization, the Jerusalem Institute of Justice, to kind of raise awareness about this topic. So anyway, he comes to us. Jeremy, one of the founders of Pifio, had met him in Israel. And I hop on the call, and he starts talking about all this crazy, the United Nations is biased against Israel. And I'm literally sitting on this call being like, what the heck is this guy talking about? Like, the United Nations, one of the most legitimate organizations in the history of mankind, is just biased for no good reason against Israel. And who's Israel? What is this? I had no idea about any of this stuff. And I was incredibly skeptical that Kalev knew what he was talking about. Being the producer of the video, I had to kind of do my due diligence and look into it. And so I started researching and, looking up articles and reading decisions and, reading blog, but just diving into this whole topic. And I came to the conclusion that the United Nations is, in fact, biased against Israel. And it didn't make any sense to me. I couldn't understand why. Why is this organization biased against Israel? Now, at the time, I came to realize that there was political reasons behind it, right? There was the communist voting bloc. I mean, again, kind of American history or recent American history, communism versus, democracy or capitalism was a big deal. Right? It's the Cold War and all that kind of stuff. Well, the communist voting bloc, in order to gain more power against the United States, joined up with the Muslim voting bloc. And every time that the United Nations discredited Israel, it was actually kind of a jab at the United States and the West. Okay. So, I mean, and again, look into it for yourself. It's pretty obvious that's what happened. And, so anyway, that video went viral. It was an amazing project to work on, but that's really what introduced me to the topic of Israel. And it was through a kind of a political door that I walked through. I didn't even really have, I shouldn't say really, I had no theological lens to view Israel through, other than that word shows up in the Bible quite a bit, right? So it was after meeting Kalev, doing that video, I met your father, John, who came to Cincinnati and did a teaching, which is
Before we get into
now.
that,
Oh, go ahead.
let me just for the viewers out there, and I think it is really, really important just to sort of pick this apart a little bit. What Lucas is talking about, there's two major voting blocks in the UN that represent a perpetual majority, 2% plus vote in the UN. Those two groups are the OIC, which is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the NAM, which is the non-aligned movement. And the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, you can imagine what that is. It consists of all of the Islamic countries, which for those of you that may be new to this topic, look it up. There are very many Islamic countries on the globe and growing. And so, all of this talk about colonization and so on and so forth and imperial forces, take a look at the growing Muslim countries around the world. So I believe there are 47. Don't quote me on that. I think there are 47 countries represented in the OIC. And then the NAM is the non-aligned movement, which, as Lucas said, really stemmed out of the Cold War. It was sort of a way, initially it was formed in order to ease the tension between communist movement and democracy in the West, and eventually ended up really just being a socialist movement within the UN. And they adopted, this very anti-colonialist sort of approach. At least that's the way they frame it. And they vote unanimously and perpetually alongside the OIC. So these two groups within the UN have coalesced. And for that reason, the bias that Lucas is talking about is that, just to give you an idea, Israel is the size of New Jersey, tiny country in the Middle East. And as those of you that are in the know and just watching the news know, it dominates, 90% of your news feed all day long. You're hearing about Israel. And that should merit some questions in and of itself. With everything that's happening globally right now, which there's a lot, as there usually is, there are over 100 wars being fought on the planet right now. You probably don't even know it. Most people don't. And yet Israel is in the news constantly. And part of that is because of what's happening at the UN and this bias that Lucas is talking about. So I encourage everyone to look it up. Look up the OIC, look up the NAM, check this stuff out. But issue number 7 is a permanent agenda item that critiques Israel and its treatment of Palestinians and so on and so forth, and basically just becomes an indefinite, permanent way for the UN to criticize Israel. And I think it's over 70% of UN resolutions, so on and so forth, are against Israel. Of all the things happening on the planet.
There's this, my favorite visual from the video we did was we listed out like a bar graph of all of the governments that are responsible for the most deaths in the world, right? So you got this huge bar chart, China and all these kind of millions of deaths. And Israel's like at the very bottom with like, a couple thousand or whatever it was at the time I did the video. And then you did a bar chart of number of resolutions against nations. And it was almost completely inverted, right? It was huge bar chart for Israel and China was like 2. Like it was crazy.
Yeah. And so I want to bring this back full circle into your story, Lucas. And I do think it's interesting because, we've been friends for quite some years now and working together on these projects. And you and I have butted heads periodically, theologically and philosophically over the years. And I think that's probably only served to make us better friends, actually. So it's not that we agree on every fine point, or at least maybe we agree on more, some more now than we
agree on some big points. We definitely disagree on some finer points.
Yeah. But all that to say, your introduction to this, and I really find that to be pretty interesting. And I think something that shouldn't be lost on the viewers, your introduction to the Israel topic really didn't come from a biblical perspective at all. It came from this bizarre project that was thrown on your plate where you were highly skeptical, and then jump into this story just from a research perspective. Can I, in good faith, create this content piece?
That's right.
This sounds ridiculous. Is this a real thing? Only to discover that it was, which led to, I can only imagine the delta of roads that led you down, or pathways that led you down. One of them, of course, being your biblical orientation. And I do want to give you the liberty to share about that here as well.
Yeah. So I found myself in this living room with a bunch of guys, and guy by the name of John Myers, who you know very well, Shimon, was doing a teaching on what is now, he kind of has a whole teaching around it called the Israel story, but it was before that. And he was just teaching about God's dealing with Israel and the Jewish people throughout all of Scripture, and how that hasn't stopped. And, started talking about the modern reestablishment of the nation of Israel. Again, all topics I had no background of. I did not come from like a faith background where all this stuff was talked about and celebrated a lot. And then how, essentially the church relates to Israel and the Jews. And it was one of the most impactful teachings I had experienced. Not necessarily from like oh my gosh, Israel is so interesting, but more from a perspective of, oh my gosh, God is so interesting. Like, this is pretty crazy. Like, God is telling this millennia's long story, and it's filled with covenants and promises and land and people and wars and miracles. And yeah, of course it's still going on, right? Of course, this is, if you look at the language in the Old Testament, how God talks about this stuff and how much he cares about this, and how much, for whatever reason, this is how he decided to tell the story, was largely through the nation of Israel and the Jewish people.
So what are some things that stand out to you from that? If you could just remember back, because it was so impactful in your life. And I know at this point, one thing I know about you is you're not one of those guys that's out there worshiping Israel, worshiping the Jews and everything they do. You've been to Israel how many times? And we could talk about what it's like for you to travel to Israel, because I've had the pleasure of accompanying you on several occasions. But what were some things about that, if you recall, and I hate to put you on the spot in that way,
that's good.
Could be biblical things or just things that really moved you about, as you're saying, the nature of God in this story. What was so impactful for you, or most impactful, if you can remember a few things?
Yeah, as you know, Shimon, no matter how often I go to Israel, no matter how much I support Israel, the Israeli TSA hates me and stops me every time I go to that airport. But
I've never seen anything like it. I can honestly say that I have accompanied many, many people in and out of Israel. And as a dual citizen, somebody that holds two passports and speaks Hebrew fluently and English, usually if I'm with somebody, they can slide right through. And you're the only person in the history of me doing that I've got pulled aside. And I think this was the last time we were there together.
It was.
And literally, like, pulled you into a room. I don't know if they strip searched you. They brought you to a section, a private section of that room to interview. I have never been in that room before. That's how far this went. And I was pretty upset. You may recall. I was like, what are you doing?
Because you were so confident.
A million times.
I told him, I was like, Shimon, every time they stop me. He's like, if you come with me, they won't stop you.
I'm like, I got you. And I'm like yelling at these low-level security clerks, like, what are you doing to this poor guy?
They do it every time.
And we're arguing, and they're like, sir, you stand over there. I'm like, are you serious? Anyway, go on.
Yeah, so I have no misconceptions about, humanity in general and the Jewish people specifically. But yeah, I would say the first thing, honestly, I remember the first thing he said that really hit me was, and this might frustrate some Christians, so just earmuffs if you're easily offended, but he talked about how in Romans Paul makes the case that essentially God saved the Gentiles to make the Jews jealous, right? And I remember, and then the analogy he uses, Gentiles are the date that God took to the dance to make his ex-girlfriend jealous, and I just remember that stuck with me, and it was really humbling to some degree to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, I'm not the center of the story, right? Like, God's telling a much bigger story here. But it also was like, I wasn't like offended by that. I wasn't like, well, I want to be, the ex-girl or whatever. I want to be the first choice. It wasn't that. It was a humility of like, oh, this is really, I'm kind of honored, that God would choose to like let me in on this story that he's been telling with the Jewish people since the beginning of time, essentially. And then the whole idea of the miraculous restoration of Israel. The idea that the greatest miracle, apart from the resurrection, of course, that has taken place in the history of humanity has taken place in the last century, and that we get to be a part of that we get to witness it, and that, without going into all the eschatology and all the end time stuff, because who knows how that's all going to play out, but it's like, man, what a privilege it is to be able to not only witness what God is doing, but to play a part in it somehow. And that just was so significant to me. And then, of course, just the awesomeness literally the awesomeness of that story just floored me. Like we're talking about a story that's taking place over thousands of years across every conceivable continent on earth, across every people group, across, and the ridiculousness that this would be possible, to see what we've seen in the last 100 years literally made me worship God, deeper than I ever had, because wow, how cool is that? That this is the kind of thing, this is the kind of God he is. So those are the things that really stood out to me in that teaching.
So, and I'll just say, as somebody that's of Jewish descent, I get uneasy sometimes if somebody Jewish quotes the verses about God said those that bless Abraham will be blessed, those that curse him will be cursed. I don't like when Jewish people quote that. It makes me uneasy when anyone quotes it, quite frankly, because I, as somebody of that descent, I don't want people even considering that when they interact with me. And that maybe is just me personally, but I do know that there are, people that share your persuasion. It does tend to give them a perspective on God that's just different. And I know I've heard my dad talk about, the one-sided covenant, and where, if I remember right, God makes this covenant with Abraham and cuts these animals in half and walks right
completely
through
unilaterally.
And it was only him. And then, so it does tend to sort of lead to just in my opinion, a more humble, just like you said. I like the fact that you used the word worship, because that's, I think a lot of people associate that with music or all these different things.
No.
Well, really, it's just this like being in awe of.
That's right.
And reverence, or whatever it may be. And I can understand and see, where understanding that really it talks about the gracious nature of God. If you read the theology, which I've spent many years of my life doing, and understand that it has nothing to do with the goodness,
there it is,
of these people. And, having spent a good portion of my life in Israel, just driving around on the roads and shouting at people, and disbelief that people can treat each other that way sometimes. You're like, oh yeah, this must be what he's talking about. That it's like, it's not for your sake, you're stiff-necked and hard or whatever. But and I do think there are a lot of misconceptions out there by people that are sort of in this other camp. And some of that is because of an imbalance. We could be honest about that too, of people that almost worship Israel above a creator, and almost anything that Israel does is on a pedestal, and they can do no wrong. And, we're certainly not those people here at Arise. We chuckle about that, but I'd love for you to drill down even just one layer further before we move into Christian nationalism, about sort of the personal way that has led you to understand a creator in a different fashion, if you could.
Well, in the same way you pointed out that, the story of God and Israel is a story of a unilateral loyalty, that God is loyal to this people for no other reason than that's who God is. That's the kind of God he is. It's not because they deserve it. It's not because they're better. It's just the kind of God he is. And there's a humility in that for us that really hit me, because here I am, I'm a Gentile, never even maybe heard the word Israel until I was like in my 20s, right? I came from a blue collar, middle class family in the suburbs of Detroit. And one night I found myself on the rooftop of an apartment in Jerusalem in, what's the name of the market there?
Machne
Yehuda. Yeah, in the Shuk. I'm on this a huge, beautiful apartment complex overlooking the Israeli Supreme Court and in the land of Israel. And I'm on the rooftop with all of these brothers of mine. And we're like, talking about what God's doing and all that kind of. And I remember sitting there going like, how the hell did I get here? Like, what am I doing here? Like, what happened? And it was a humbling experience to just be like, well, in the same way God chose the Jews, God chooses all of us. And it rarely has anything to do with who we are or what we're capable of or what we do, but he invites us to be a part of his story. And it's very humbling. And I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. I didn't like get involved in Israel because I wanted the blessings, or to be completely candid, I'm not even exactly sure how that works anymore with that blessing. To your point, like, I don't like go around touting that a lot. I've more adopted the other side of it, is like, I'm just not going to curse them. That sounds like a better position to have. But I can't say that my life hasn't been blessed, since doing what I can to play a small role in this whole thing. And I'll take it.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing that personal side of your story and sort of connecting it to the topic. I do want to just for the sake of time, sort of move into what
Yeah,
we want to talk about today,
that's
which
right.
is this far right Christian nationalist movement. And I do want to just sort of, in contrast to your story or in connection to it, what I want you to imagine for a moment that your journey of faith started last year or 2 years ago. And instead of having the introduction to Israel that you had, which was certainly unique in both the political sense and the theological sense, can you imagine? I don't know if it's even possible to imagine what it would be like to have had some introduction to the Christian faith and step into,
Oh boy. Yeah.
this topic, the topic of Israel today. Any thoughts on that?
Well, that's a fascinating question, because on the topic of Christian nationalism that we're gonna get into, it's not like all of this stuff we're hearing against Israel, all of the theological stuff we're hearing against Israel, all of the political stuff we hear against Israel. It's not like it's patently obvious on the surface that it's false, right? A lot of it sounds true. A lot of it sounds good. And of course, you pair it with pictures and personalities on large network, news stations and influencers. It's like, I don't know, man. I mean, I might have been caught up in it, but part of why I haven't is because I didn't come into the conversation 2 years ago, right? I came into the conversation a while ago, and I had a lens of discernment to be like, that's not true. That's not true. Wait a minute. That's not how I remember hearing about this stuff. But anybody who doesn't have a 15-year history and has dove into this topic as deeply as I have, I can understand why they're buying into it. So it's kind of a scary thought experiment to think about
Quick
that.
question. So on that note, what would you say to somebody, new believer, new whatever, somebody that's just coming into this faith, or even the Israel topic? What would your advice to them be? Because I know I just know from years with you, you are a very objective person. You are going to look at both sides of an
Yes.
argument and form an opinion. You're not
Yeah.
somebody that is moved easily off of a position either. And so just some balanced advice. If somebody's just stepping into this arena for the first time and they don't really know what to believe, how would you advise them?
I mean, to put it as practically as I possibly can, I would say go through the Israel story. I mean, as practically as I can say. I mean, because there's a lot more to it than that. Like, read your Bible, and really read your Bible. Like, don't listen to what other people are telling you about. Really read it. I think you'll come out with, if nothing else, you'll come out with this idea that Israel is very important, and it didn't stop being important to God, 2,000 years ago. But the Israel story was the most comprehensive teaching I had heard about the whole topic, start to finish. And the people that I know that have gone through that have been able to kind of like have the lens of discernment on when they hear all this other stuff, and they can kind of withstand it. But those that don't really take time to learn the story of God's dealing with Israel, they're gonna get dragged away by these other ideas out there. So I would probably say, as practically as I can, go through the Israel story.
We'll put a link in
And
there for
yeah,
the
for
Israel
those that don't know
story.
what it is, it's a course that you can go through. But if you're interested in that, take a look. We'll share a link here, and there is an app and all types of ways for you to access this very, very streamlined and also personally engaging course.
That's right.
So moving on, I want you to just talk a little bit about what you're seeing. So you were introduced to your faith, then you were introduced to Israel politically, then you went through this course that sort of connected those two things and really caused this deep connection and perspective that you have and live with that really is something, a way that you interact with and even see God or your creator. Christian nationalism. Now, first, I just want to say it's not a new thing. Far right wing Christian nationalism is not a new movement. I would encourage those of you that are just acclimating yourselves with this topic to look up even the far right Christian nationalist movement of the 1930s. And, Lucas, I know we want to tread softly into that water, and you can speak to that as well. But I do think it's important for people to understand that what we're seeing right now, in many ways, is history repeating itself. It's not something new. There's a lot of ugliness that we may get into here. But I would encourage people to do a little research and see how this may have happened in history. But Lucas, what are you seeing out there? What are your thoughts? What are your
Yeah.
concerns?
So in the same way that, Christian nationalism wasn't on my radar, I got introduced to this idea called the Seven Mountain Mandate, which is essentially this idea that Christians, and I'm going to really overly simplify the idea, but that Christians should be influencing every strata of society. It kind of is a counterbalance to this idea that Christians should just like become hermits and go out into the wilderness and wait until Jesus comes back and, let the whole world go to hell in a handbasket. And so I remember hearing that and thinking, wow, that makes a lot of sense, especially because unfortunately in our country over these last, I don't know, 2 decades or so, we've seen the moral fabric of our society fraying at the edges, and issues of what's being taught to our kids in public schools and what's a woman, and all these kinds of different moral topics. There's just been such confusion in our country that all of a sudden this idea comes forward and is like, Christian nationalism, we can fix all this, right? Let's just get Judeo-Christian values into the school system again, and into the government again, and into arts again, and into music again. And it's like, what Christian wouldn't want that? Yeah, that sounds great. So I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. I was kind of like, sign me up. Like this sounds awesome to me. Then you start engaging in conversations about how would we go about achieving this Christian utopia, right? And it starts to get a little tricky. Starts to get a little bit kind of dicey. Okay. So it's one of those things where I don't fault the motivation behind it. Wanting Christ to be glorified and worshiped and followed by all people in all stratas of society, awesome, right? And this is where, why I told you I was a little bit worried about, I don't want to lump everybody that ascribes to this kind of philosophy into the same camp. There are a lot of people that are well-meaning, well-intentioned Christians that might even describe themselves as Christian nationalists that aren't far-right radicals that we're going to probably talk about on this podcast. They would probably disagree with most of the methodologies of these other people. But because of language, we just say Christian nationalism, and then we're talking about the whole lump. But for purposes of what I'm about to say, I'm not talking about the well-intentioned people, right?
So just to feedback on that a little bit and drill down a few layers of Christian nationalism. I don't know a ton about this movement, to be honest with you, but it seems like what you're saying is it's a combination, and I'm sure there's overlap as well, of people that really want to see, let's just say, Judeo-Christian values being implemented, promoted
Yeah,
throughout every level of society. And that was
that's right.
part of the Seven Mountains approach.
Correct.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around this whole thing. And then, and which obviously seems, as somebody, that supports Judeo-Christian values, I can't see where that would be a bad thing.
What's wrong with that?
Right. It seems like it would be a good thing. Where would you say that, in terms of moving into this more extreme form that we seem to be seeing today, seem to be massively, we're beyond its emerging. I mean, it's just a growing movement. What would you say are some of the dividing lines there?
Also, so I don't know anything about Christian nationalism. So Simeon, why don't
Or
you
Christianity?
ask all of
Just
it?
kidding. I'm joking.
I just know the Stations of the Cross, and that's all like we ever learned. So, and we had the guy just walked around with the cross on his back. And so, when you talk about Christian nationalism and the more extreme side of it, like what exactly are you talking about?
Yeah. So another way to think about kind of at the crux of this topic of Christian nationalism is, how would you go about achieving this idea that Judeo-Christian values are being promoted at all stratas of society, right? That's where I think the dividing line starts to happen, right? One side might say, well, as we just continue to evangelize everybody, if everybody in a certain nation becomes a Christian through evangelism, well, then great, we achieved Christian nationalism. I think I would actually say that I kind of lean on that side, which is like, look, if it's a move of God that people voluntarily convert to Christianity or whatever, and then by virtue of that happening, the society is filled with Judeo-Christian values, great, okay? The other side starts to say, well, that might not be possible or practical, and that might take too long and whatnot. So let's get involved politically. And then it's like, well, that might take too long. So let's let's try to exert some force, right? However you want to think about that. Let's exert some force and kind of make this happen, right? Through the government. So this is where it starts to get really weird. And this is where it goes. Again, I'm trying to like synthesize thousands of conversations into one podcast here, but it's something like, well, what's the root cause of why our nation is not a Christian nation? What happened? And it's like the Jews. Like, whoa, how did we get there? Well, the Jews control finance, and the Jews control media, and the Jews have AIPAC, and they, are influencing our government. And the Jews, there's this guy who once said that he's going to use pornography to make everybody turn away from Christianity, and he's a Jewish guy, and all this kind of stuff. And unfortunately, there are some Jews that are in those positions that have done some bad things that these people can then use as evidence. See, that guy's Jewish. See, that guy's Jewish. See, it's the Jews. So the Jews, they're the problem. The reason why we don't have this amazing Christian nation is because the Jews have been influencing our country for too long, and now we have to essentially take it back from the Jews, right? Well, how are you going to do that, right? It's like, it just starts to get kind of dark. It starts to get dark where it's like,
so this just sounds crazy.
We're going to deport them from the country, or what are you talking about? This is where, to your point, Shimon, the line for me is, I'm like, look, as soon as the conversation goes there, we've lost the plot, and it gets just wild to me.
I just can't understand I'm a pragmatist, if anything, how in the world you can make these jumps because a Jewish person, was involved in the proliferation of pornography or something like that, as well as people from so many other nationalities.
I know.
It's it's so hard for me to wrap. And I'll tell you, Simone and I were out, I'll give you an example. Simone and I were out to dinner a couple months ago, Simone. And remember my buddy that I went to college with, my college roommate, I haven't seen him in for years. I tried to buy them dinner. I ended up buying them a dessert because they had already, I don't know, but it didn't matter. And we get to talking and he's like, oh, I have this big following on social media. We probably won't be friends anymore if you see it. And I was like, okay, what do you mean? Like I have my sense of humor. You're not going to offend me. He's like, well, you never know. Well, and I started talking about it and I was like, well, it's not like, this is like blatant anti-Semitism or something like that. Is it like, what am I going to be seeing here? I can certainly hang with the, jokes on people of any ethnicity for sure. But he literally rattled off one of those tropes. He literally said, well, no, it's not, it's not the Jews. Like we make fun of everybody, but the Jews did introduce pornography.
The Jews.
And I'm like,
right.
What Jews? like a Jew? Like there was a Jewish person that did this? And like how you make this jump to
and
just...
I have an answer.
Okay, good.
This is my opinion. One of the most galvanizing components of a movement is having a clear enemy, right? You want a movement, you define an enemy. Defining immorality in general is not clear. It's hard to define an enemy that is just immorality. You have to personify it, right? And as soon as you personify it, you can rally around. And unfortunately, I think the Jews have found themselves in this spot, unfortunately, more often than you'd hope. And because there are some Jews that do bad things, and because the Jews are an interesting and unique people that have certain characteristics, certain ways that they do things, certain allegiances that they have to their people, because they tend to outperform their counterparts in societies that they find themselves in, because they have a disproportionate share of resources because of their outperformance. They find themselves on the butt end of envy a lot. I think that people need to personify the enemy to galvanize their movement, and the Jews become the personification of that. And then you also have a nation, Israel, that allows you to do it through a political lens. So it's not even just a moral, humanistic lens of we hate a certain kind of person, but that it's Israel is really the enemy. It's really a nation that's the enemy. And it's Israel that has infiltrated America, and it's Israel that has corrupted America. And really, we have to sever the ties with Israel and get all Israel influence out of our country. And then we have a chance at establishing the Christian nationalism that we also desire. That's my hypothesis as to why it got there.
So that kind of rings true. And I just am picking it apart a little bit. So first of all, I think stereotypes are funny. and are kind of accurate sometimes. And I don't have a problem with it, right? So like, what's wrong with stereotyping, and what's wrong with, and I think, you brought up some of these things, like, Jews tend to have these allegiances to their own people and stuff, as well as so many other
So many
people
others.
groups on the planet,
That's right.
almost every single one, but also ethnicities. Like,
I know.
which ethnicity doesn't have a community to some degree that's based on it? So why is that a bad thing? And then you brought up another point, which seems to be this disproportionate, I'm just going to call it the level of success,
There you
if
go.
you would.
That's right.
And so, per capita, we know more, whatever it may be, more books published, more PhDs,
right.
more. And so this success, and then you see that embodied
That's
in
right.
the state of Israel,
That's
this tiny state that if the surrounding nations that by far outnumber them could, they absolutely would have wiped them off the face of the map, over and over again. And now we're seeing a much greater movement, it seems like, unfortunately, of countries that are aligned with that perspective. Israel is the problem. And it does make you scratch your head. And again, I'm not one of these people that like, Jewish pride and all that. Not at all.
No.
But it's like, wait a minute, like, how much of that factors into it? Like, this doesn't make any sense that this group, they must be evil because they're so disproportionately successful.
Well, and
And
that's, by the way, that's a mindset that has been kind of promulgated in our country for the last couple decades, where if you are successful, you got there by oppressing people. Like,
Right.
that was a firm foundation laid here that I think this picked up on pretty quickly.
So is this just the perfect storm? Because we've known that oppressed and oppressor narrative has infiltrated, of course, education at every level at this point. And we, those that tend to lean a little bit more, I'm not even going to put it in political parties, conservative or liberal or whatever, but those that, are a little bit more just practical, don't buy into that. Certainly capitalists don't buy into that, typically, so on and so forth. But is that it's almost like I feel like we're in the perfect storm right now.
Yes, I agree.
With all of these different things.
I agree.
And the rate at which these sentiments are accelerating is mind-boggling to me. And I'm seeing things that I never would have thought that I would see in my lifetime.
There's a new Jewish trope every week, honestly.
I know. Yeah.
It's unimaginable. And it's like, what is it? What's behind this? And I think that's the conversation we're having. And I want to keep sort of just peeling back that onion, because I do think that perspective led to it. And then Israel being framed as the last opportunity to fight imperialism, to fight white colonialism. And so they've completely created a narrative around this people that isn't even true. It's not to say that there's zero element of truth that could be derived from that, but it certainly is I would say not even half the truth if you were to break it down to even just the demographic makeup of Israel and ethnic makeup of Israel and so on and so forth. But so let's keep talking about it. What are some other perspectives you have about how we got here?
Yeah. And I want to be clear too. I don't think Christian nationalism is the reason why we're seeing this, dare I say, anti-Semitism. I think you and I both know there are a lot of bad actors in the world that are spending billions and billions of dollars to try to convince everybody Israel is the devil. Okay. So that didn't start with Christian. I'm not blaming Christian nationalists for this. I think to some degree I could say Christian nationalism, the way I'm talking about it, this radical Christian nationalism, has been almost co-opted by that movement and has been influenced by that movement. But the other thing that I see behind it, and I've actually, in some ways, I refer to the far right Christian nationalism camp as almost, I don't call them Christian nationalists, I call them nationalist Christians. Because I think it's not motivated by a Christian theological framework of the world. It's motivated by a political framework of the world. And then Christianity comes in second. And that political framework of the world is, things are bad here. We shouldn't be spending a dime on anybody else's problems as long as we have problems here. We shouldn't be involved in any wars anywhere. And we should only focus on America, right? Which is textbook isolationism. Okay. So you have a political view of isolationism, which again, on the surface, who would argue with that? I don't want wars. Do you want wars? I don't want wars. I'll have no wars, please. Okay. No problems here. If we just stop spending money with other countries, we'll have no problems here. Okay. Sign me up. I don't want any problems in America, right? The problem is twofold. A, it's a fantasy. Okay, isolationism doesn't work. It's a fantasy. It sounds good. It has great talking points. You can kind of ride your moral high horse as being somebody who's anti-war. And now anybody else who's talking about, well, we need to be in wars, well, you're a warmonger, right? And so it's really kind of attractive as an idea. Then when you couple that with what we just talked about, well, what's the main reason why we get involved in foreign wars? Oh, it's Israel. If we just didn't have this ally that was Israel, we wouldn't even be in the Middle East. We would literally all be in our mansions in the United States, sipping margaritas and just living the good life. But by God, that $3 billion that we give to Israel every year is the bane of our existence. It's the reason why everything sucks in America. Again, it's a personification of an enemy that is very tangible, and it's very easy to wrap your head around it. And then to your point, you point out a couple facts that are true. Those facts are true. And then it supports your argument, and boom, you have a galvanized movement that you can build an audience around, that you can get clicks for, that you can do all of those things. And so that's where I do think it's this perfect storm. And then you add Christianity to it, and you start throwing some Bible verses in there, and you start talking about, how God divorced Israel, and so Christians shouldn't even be a part of this whole thing. And that's now the perfect storm. You have the theological view, you have the political view, and you have kind of the societal view of a perfect society if all these things came together.
So I just want to talk for a minute as an Israeli to some of that. Somebody that is a dual citizen of the United States and Israel, but I just want to talk about the Israeli part of my identity right now and how extremely disheartening all of that is, and how it really is just, it's just painful. Because here you are, the only, liberal democracy in the Middle East, the only place where women can experience freedom, true freedom, where, that celebrates diversity of every kind, even sexual orientation, whether or not that's controversial. So what? That's the truth. And you're kind of doing everything that you can. And really, like, you view the United States as your best friend. We wave flags in Israel on the 4th of July. I'm sure people shoot fireworks off. We congratulate the United States on their independence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We view them as our best friends on the planet. When they go to war, we go to war with them, because we're fighting the same enemy on behalf of the same cause. That has been the case. That has been my personal experience. And to see this massive shift, it just kind of hurts as an Israeli. If you bypass all of the politics and you bypass all of the rhetoric and all of that, and then simultaneously I'm watching, here we are waving American flags and supporting who we think are our best friends and our best allies, and we watch the Free Palestine movement, and they're not just burning Israeli flags, they're burning American flags on American soil. And nobody seems to be talking about the shared value system, the shared history, the friendship and bond that these two countries have had. And it's just so disheartening, painful. I just watch it, and I watch it continuously growing. I watch these interviews with Tucker. He's, picking off these specific people and giving them platform, never bringing in the other side of the argument. So he'll
and if he does, he lambastes them and just attacks them while they're on his platform.
But he never asked the guy, what portion of blame for what's happening in Gaza. This guy that he just interviewed, I watched the whole interview about this guy that got fired essentially from the contractor organization that hired him to work for the GHF, and he begged them to reinstate his contract, or he said, "Oh, this will be your worst nightmare." And he truly has done everything that he can to become that worst nightmare. By all accounts, you're hearing one side of the story that Tucker's presenting to you. Hopefully the other side comes out. We will see. But, I watch that, and it's like he never once in the whole thing points any finger at Hamas. No blame for what's happening to the people that they are the leadership of. It's all Israel. It's just insanity to me.
The other side of this, Shimon, that you and I are well aware of, that it's almost interesting how, I talked about how any movement really needs an enemy. And the more personified that enemy is, the clearer it is, and the more galvanized the movement can be around. At this point, the thing that you really can't say right now is that Islam is the enemy. The thing that you can't say is that radical Islam is really the enemy. And that really what's going on are these Islamic countries like Qatar that are spending billions of dollars to essentially brainwash our youth into accepting Islam while they are invading countries through refugee status and other things. I saw Rise just posted something the other day that said something about like 85% of the refugees in the world are Muslim or something, and they will not return to their other nations. And it's like, that's interesting. Right?
Not only that, they're not refugees to other Muslim states ever.
That's right.
They only become refugees to the
That's right.
Western world.
So I say all this to say, and again, I'm not trying, in the same way I'm not trying to lump everybody into the Christian nationalist camp, I'm not lumping every Muslim into this camp. I'm not saying every Muslim's a bad guy. But this idea that there is a coordinated effort in the world today to wipe Western civilization off the map as we know it, you can't say that. It's a boogeyman theory. It's not real. I mean, Tucker even said this. Well, when was the last time Iran shot a nuke at us? It's like, well, you idiot. Of course, they haven't done it yet, right? But to say that because somebody hasn't killed you yet, they never will. It's a dumb argument, right? Like,
well, especially when their
there.
parliament, every parliamentary meeting, every single day they chant death to Israel, death to the United States. They chant it and they mean it.
The president of Iran says, we don't mean death to the American people. We just mean death to all the bad stuff that America does. Are you kidding me? Like, you let that go on an interview and you're going to take that at face value? Like, no.
Not death to you, not literal physical death, just death to your way of life.
Just, just like the good kind of death. It's the good death for Americans,
It's like the people who are like, from the river to the sea. Well, we don't really mean that. No. It's just, okay.
Simone had a great point when we were talking about this, a week or so ago. And she said, every president, whether Democrat or Republican, and I thought about it in my lifetime, she said in her lifetime, which is shorter than mine, I've been on the planet for about a half a century now this month.
Wow.
But every president truly in my entire lifetime has been openly committed to the country of Iran never getting a nuclear weapon.
That's right.
Obama, Biden, all the Bushes, you name it, everyone has unanimously agreed Iran can never get a nuclear weapon because they'll use it. And not only, let's go global, every governing body in the Western world has agreed that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. The UN, all of them, they sanctioned them. But Tucker Carlson, they're not a threat. It's either, and he puts you in an either or scenario. Either they're a threat or fentanyl coming across our borders is a threat. But
and this is where I see the ideology taking over, because now I think Tucker's a smart guy. Okay. I think in his heart of hearts, he knows Iran is a threat. But here's the problem. If he admits Iran is a threat, then the idea that we need an ally in the Middle East like Israel is justified. But if he can prove to you that he doesn't think Iran is a threat, then he can prove that we don't need the ally of Israel. And so all of the arguments start to get distorted through this ideology, where it's like we're not even looking at things objectively anymore. We're looking at them through the lens of, we want utopia in America. We think Israel is the problem. And so we're going to reinterpret all of human history and world events through the lens of, how can we make sure that the messaging we're putting forward supports us ending our alliance with Israel? Even if it means sitting across the table from the president of Iran, who just admitted he wants you dead, but saying he didn't really mean it that way.
I think he's really good at playing dumb.
Yes.
And then you follow up with all of the violence that comes out of Iran. It's like, oh no, we don't really believe in violence. It's literally all you believe and all you do. It's just crazy.
Yeah. So anyway, one more layer of the perfect storm is this idea. And we were at the ARC conference in London this year, and it was really encouraging. In the same way, I would say, Shimon, that it is discouraging that what we're seeing in America. There are some really encouraging moments too. There's some encouraging movements happening. The ARC conference was, they had the unequivocal position that the main threat to Western society is not Israel. It is this anti-Western view of the world, this anti-Western movement that is, you could say Russia, China, Iran are the main players. Qatar is a big funder of it. They're very willing to be right below the radar. Everybody else can be talking about all this other stuff, Israel and all this kind of stuff. Let all those conversations, we'll just be behind the radar, and we'll chip away at Western society. We'll chip away at the moral fabric. We'll chip away at everything that Western society is founded on until it collapses. And then we can take over. Like, to think that we don't live in a world where there are powers that be that want to take over the world, you're kidding yourself. They absolutely do. Okay. And Iran is a part of it. And if we don't do anything about Iran, don't kid yourself. It's not like they're just going to go quietly away and leave us alone. They don't want our way of life on this planet. And as much as I don't want wars, as much as I don't like bombs, it's a reality. Matter of fact, I had this thought the other day. Even God can't prevent wars. You know, in Revelation 12, it talks about war breaking out in heaven. Like, war breaks out in heaven. It's going to happen here. And the important thing is that we make sure we're fighting the right wars. And the war we should be fighting right now is not the one against Israel. That's the dumbest thing I can possibly imagine at this point.
Meanwhile, people are disrupted trying to go to work. They're disrupted on their just regular holidays here in the United States. And guess what? How many protests on behalf of the state of Israel have kept you from going to work? How many protests on college campuses on behalf of the state of Israel have disrupted your study schedule and kept you from going to class on a college campus? It's unthinkable that meanwhile, exactly as you said, all this focus on Israel is taking place, and simultaneously the level of disruption by the people that oppose Western civilization as we know it, Judeo-Christian values, the disruption is at a level that we have never seen it before. And it's amazing to me that people, just pragmatic thinkers, cannot see this paradigm taking place right here in the United States.
That's right.
Open your eyes and be able to see and discern who is your friend and who is your enemy. I never hear anyone talking anymore about that. Who is our, just on a really simple level, who is my friend and who is my enemy? These narratives have been flipped on their heads, flipped upside down. How many planes have been hijacked in the name of Judaism? Or, I mean, it's just like people have just lost their minds over this stuff. So I do want to start to just kind of land this plane and talk about a couple things. One is, Lucas, what do we do? I mean, we are committed to fighting this battle for PR. And honestly, initially it started as PR on behalf of a public opinion on behalf of Israel. It's broadened from there to Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values, our way of life. Israel is at the forefront of it. And for those of you that are sitting there criticizing Israel every day, maybe you're a Christian, maybe you're not, doesn't really matter. Ask yourself why. Why is this country filling up so much of your talk, so much of your space? And I could tell you the reason why, because it is the forefront. It is the front lines for the battle between Judeo-Christian values, Western civilization, and all of the other powers that be, whether it be Islamism, socialism, communism, totalitarianism. Israel stands as a beacon in the middle of one of the darkest regions on the planet, a beacon of democracy, freedom, and life as we know it here in Western civilization. So that's what's going on. Lucas, how can people get involved and get in this fight? And then also, I do want to ask you, where do you see this going from here?
Yeah. So I would say, maybe I'll cater my message specifically to the Christians out there. Like, if you're a Christian, there's a lot going on right now. There's a lot of voices in this. There's a lot of stories out there and whatnot. I think the basic question I have for you that I think you need to really wrestle with and come to a conclusion on, and that is this story that I just talked about, the story between God and the Jews, between the story between God and the nation of Israel, is that playing out before us right now or not? Is God restoring the Jewish people to the land of Israel or not? Again, this is just from a Christian perspective, because for me, this is the fundamental question that I wrestle with, right? There's political angles, there's humanitarian angles, there's all sorts of other angles you can look at this through, which I agree with everything you just said, okay? But for the Christian in particular, I think the evidence, scripturally and historically, that God is supernaturally restoring the Jewish people to the land of Israel is overwhelming, okay? So you have to come to the conclusion yourself. Do you believe that or not? And the way you asked the question, Shimon, is why? Like, based on everything that you've read, based on all the study you've done, Why is it that you think that? Secondly, I would say if you do think that that's what's happening, that God is doing something in the nation of Israel, and I would even argue that one of the reasons why I think Israel's at the forefront of the conversation is because of this, because this is what God is doing in our time, right? The next question is he calling you to be a part of it? Now, I don't think every Christian needs to be a part of this. I really don't. I don't think every single Christian needs to do what I did and go to Israel and start Israeli nonprofits that help Israel. And you don't have to do that, okay? But what I would caution you against is if God is doing this, what you absolutely cannot be is opposed to it. You absolutely cannot be opposed to it. You can be neutral. Look, God cares about a lot of things. There's a lot of things that you could care about on this earth. There's a lot of things that God cares about that I'm not selling everything I own to go be a part of, okay? I'm not saying you have to, but you shouldn't oppose it. If God is for it, don't oppose it. And what I'm seeing in the church, and the thing that makes me the most nervous about the time that we're in, is when I'm seeing Christians adopting this anti-Israel and, dare I say, anti-Semitic stance that, all of our problems would go away if the Jews would just leave. That is what I would say. Do not go down that path. Like, whatever you do, don't go down that path. I don't think it will end well for you. I don't think it will end well for our nation. And I can't caution you against that enough. Stay out of it.
All right, I want to ask you a challenging question right now because of your perspective and your persuasion. For those that want to, I talked to a really good guy recently. I know him through fly fishing, and he was posting something, some anti-Netanyahu, whatever, and it was just weird. Like, you have a fly fishing page. Why is this going on? But I just asked him. I'm like, why are you posting? It's like, I'm just curious, genuinely curious, not even challenging in any way. And he was like, well, I work 3 jobs and I just wanted to, and he's just bought into this thing that, like, the reason I have to work 3 jobs and I struggle is somehow because of Netanyahu. It's crazy, right? And I do want to just bring some light into this. The funding that the United States sends to Israel, just so everybody knows, makes up 5% of foreign aid, if that, is in the form of what is best described as military vouchers. Just so everybody knows, do your research on it. It's actually loans, but those loans are required to be invested here in the United States, buying arms and services and equipment from American companies. That's how that transfer of aid happens. Get out your phone, Google it, ChatGPT it, whatever resources you have. Before you're quick to say, let's shut down that foreign aid, you might lose your job, or someone that that works for one of these companies may lose their job here in the United States if that were cut down. And that's its own topic. That's just a reality. So I could support the argument one way or the other that Israel should be able to support itself militarily, so on and so forth. We could talk about that.
Yep.
But let me ask you the hard question.
Okay.
For people in that sense. So I see these signs around, or wherever that say God, family, country. Mm-hmm. And you just defined your perspective on Israel, and that it's something that you think God's doing. It's biblical. It's a miracle. It's a biblical miracle, not just a miracle of biblical portion. It's literally a biblical miracle. If you're an America first person, and just a well-meaning Christian nationalist, you haven't bought into all that, maybe you don't know what to feel. How do you navigate the priority level there? Is there any practical advice you give? And I know that's not an easy question, because it's like, do I put my faith, and Israel's kind of tied into my faith, do I put that first, or is that in somehow contradicting me putting my patriotism first? And I'm not sure I have an answer to that question, but I'm really curious your perspective on that.
Well, first of all, I want to make it very clear, and I heard somebody use this language before, and it really resonated with me. I am incredibly grateful to be a citizen of the United States. I am incredibly grateful. I owe a ton to this country. And for that reason, I want great things for this country. I want great things for this country for my own, well-being, for my children. I think it's the greatest nation on earth. I'll just say that. Okay. Incredibly grateful for the United States. I don't think this is a zero-sum game that I also can't be supportive of another country. I am supportive of another country, and I do want what's really good for Israel. And I don't think that me wanting what's good for Israel means I have to want something bad for America. I actually think it's in both of our best interests to have a strong alliance. The $3 billion in aid that we give to Israel, to your point, that gets spent in the United States, which is actually probably something like $1 billion that's actually going to Israel in that regard, is such a small amount of money to have a really strong, technologically advanced ally in the Middle East on the forefront of, I know you don't like to hear it, but our enemies that want us gone. That is in our best interest as a nation to have a good relationship there. So I don't see any tension between me being God, family, country, and being incredibly grateful for the United States and being supportive of Israel at all. These people that say that it's one or the other, they're wrong.
Israel's like our little security system.
Why not? We get so much. Technological access to patents and technology that we get for it, the intelligence we get from them. I mean, even just the tourism. I mean, the land of Israel is a major component of the Christian faith. Whether or not you believe in everything that I just said about this, the steps of Jesus happened on this planet in that land. It's nice to have a friend there so we can send our people over to see those places, right? I mean, again, there's so many reasons for me to say...
But didn't Israel just hit a church in Gaza?
It's ridiculous.
It's just radical Islam is marching across,
I know.
the Middle East and Northern Africa and so on and so forth, not only wiping out actual Christian populations, but literally targeting churches, destroying them purposely, not a misfired missile or something like that. But anyway,
So just to put it plainly to your question, I don't see any reason why my loyalty to America is challenged at all by being supportive of Israel. They're completely harmonious to me.
Tucker would tell you to get out.
Oh no, exactly. And this is where the whole Christian nationalism thing starts to get weird to me. It's just like, essentially it's deport everybody that's not on board with it. And we all know where that leads, guys. It leads nowhere good. So
that's a very good answer. And thank you for taking that hard question. Next hard question. Where's it going from here? Where do you see this going from here?
Where do I see it? Well, I'm not a prophet, so I don't know. I have been discouraged. I have been greatly discouraged by what I've seen really kind of like the past 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's like new. I mean, I just never heard any of this stuff before. I've been discouraged, but I think what it's also doing is for those of us who do see it the way that I see it, I think it's strengthening us. I think it's building some resolve in us. I think, it is a fringe movement. Let's just be honest. It is a fringe movement, but it is a growing fringe movement. And we have to take that seriously. Okay. But there are still millions and millions of U.S. Christians that have a heart for Israel, that want to see good relationships between our countries. And I think we have an opportunity to really galvanize them and equip them and release them to be a part of this conversation. And so I still think we're in a good spot. I still think we have a chance. I still think Israel is, hearing the conversations from senators and Congress people in our government, it sounds like there still is a really strong support system for the nation of Israel. We just need to keep encouraging that and pouring fuel on that. And I think we have a chance at this going well for us.
That's also a great answer. Thank you so much. And I do want to just say to end on a positive note. And I want to say before I say that, I get the question all the time. Is it too late? Is it too late? Is it too late for America? And I'm not talking about with regard to Israel. I'm talking about with regard to Western civilization and the value system that this country was built on and that we believe in. And my answer is that depends on us. That depends on what you decide to do right now. Are you going to get in the fight? Are you going to speak up? Are you going to become vocal like the opposition is? Are you going to take back our halls of education and all the things that we believe in and are the fabric of our society? So that's the answer. It depends on us. We'll see where it goes from here. I do want to say, Lucas, to your point, I also, I'm in this battle. I'm having conversations that I wish I was never having and cannot believe some days that I'm having. Someone will tell you, sometimes I get very discouraged. I just cannot believe what I'm seeing. And it's discouraging. All of that being said, somebody said today, the war in Israel right now, the war that's taking place in Gaza is at the lowest approval rating so far here in the United States. That being said, the latest polls still indicate that, yes, conservative support of Israel has dropped. That's alarming, but it's still over 70%.
I know. That's
right. So there still are many more for us than are against us. But it is a time to circle the wagons. It is a time to keep people in the fold. It is a time to not get emotional, but really look at the facts. And anything that you see being portrayed on any form of media, whether it's social media, linear media. There's been this whole narrative that linear media is completely bought and paid for and agendized, so on and so forth. That's a pretty good argument. Guess what? Do you think that social media is any different? And so as you're listening to even podcasts like this, take the liberty, fact check every single word, every statistic that's been presented to you today. That is your right. But make sure that you're doing it on every front. Don't just take anything at face value. Really dig deep. If you hear somebody like this guy that was recently interviewed on Tucker Carlson, why don't you just research his story a little bit? How was he let go? And so on and so forth. Look at both sides. But,
That's right.
yes, it looks bleak at times, but it also looks very positive at times.
That's right.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Lucas, thank you very much for sharing your insights. And
Yeah,
of
that was
course,
fun.
for all of the work that we've done together over the years. As you know, we're very, very appreciative of it. Thank you to the beautiful Simone for helping to put all this together.
Great job, Simone.
And keep tracking with us. Check out the Israel story.
Yeah, John.